inside of it. These are Category 5 unshielded twisted pair cables that are for Ethernet, and you can get a box of that at your local hardware store. Usually a box of 1,000 feet costs about maybe 100, maybe a little bit less. Fire rated is more expensive, so if you don't need fire rated, try to avoid that. Anyway, so what happened is I brought the cable box in here, that reel of 1,000 feet of cable, and I pulled these individual blue wires from this central point up through that hole back there into the ceiling. So you see this false ceiling here, these ceiling tiles? That's empty space up there. So if you've never had the opportunity to stick your head up there, usually there's just empty space above those tiles. Sometimes there's insulation on top of them, but generally you have anywhere from 2 to sometimes as much as 6 or 8 feet of empty space up there. So you run those wires from that central point through the ceiling. So if you just imagine with me, if you will, if you could see up above those tiles, you'd see a couple of blue wires going across the ceiling above those tiles, and then they come down the wall. Now, most walls in commercial construction are usually hollow. So if you can see in there, there's about 3 inches of empty space. Sometimes they're not hollow, sometimes they've got insulation in them. And then depending on unique circumstances, you may have walls that just simply don't have any space at all, and that's a whole different ball of wax. But the short version of the story is you need to get these network wires from that central point where we just were to every outlet location where you're going to need an Ethernet connection. And then what you do is you put these Category 5 modular ends on them. Those modular ends then in turn fit into a wall plate, okay? And then the wall plate is labeled with a number. Now, why do we have to have a number? Well, the reason we have a number is so that we know that for that outlet right there, which is D06, which is short for data number 6, we'll bring them back here, and then I'll show you a little bit later, I'm going to mount a patch panel in here, and that patch panel will have a 1, 2, 3, 4, 5, 6, etc., and that 6 will match the 6 on the patch panel there. So that will become our horizontal network wiring system, which we will use to connect the router or switches that will live in this cabinet out to all the various locations. So I've got a receptionist office, I've also got patient exam rooms. See, here's an outlet that I've run the cable to, but I haven't yet put the faceplate on yet. So when I'm all done, there'll be faceplates on all those outlet locations with a corresponding number that relates to the patch panel in the back, and then that will be my network wiring system. Okay, I'll show you a little bit more in a few minutes. Okay, so I'm going to do an outlet here for you. I'm going to terminate the slang word is RJ45. The formal word is actually 8P8C. So for instance, these little guys right here, these modular ends with the RJ45 end on them, they're called RJ45. The real term is 8P8C, but RJ45 is what they get called a lot. So I've got this guy right here, got my wire. I'll strip back some of the jacket. I kind of do this by rubbing my scissors on the edge, and then depending on the type of cable you work with, the cable might be brittle enough that you can just kind of snap it off and get rid of my excess ripcord or dental floss, depending on what you want to call it. Now, this method I used, it's not really recommended. I've been doing this for so long that I've developed a touch that I can do this and pretty safely say that I'm not nicking any of the wires on the inside. But if you're new at this, I recommend you make that opening cut like that with your scissors, but then take the ripcord and pull back some like you're peeling a banana and get rid of the skin by cutting it off after that, because that way you avoid nicking the wires inside. Maybe when I do the next one I'll show you that. Okay, so these jacks, depending on what brand you get, all come with a different punch down pattern. Meaning, see how this has got like white blue and then blue, then white green and green, and white orange and brown, white brown and brown and so forth. And they correspond to the colors on these wires. And you can look up other videos on YouTube about how to punch down a Category 5 jack. So this is just kind of a quick and dirty to kind of help round out the video a little bit. But so what I do is I match the pattern of the wires to the colors on the sides of the jack. And what I was going to say is that depending on what brand of jack you get, this pattern could be different. So you have to just pay attention to the colors. There's two sets of colors here. The top row is what they call 568A. There's a little bitty A right there. And the lower pattern is what they call 568B. There's a little B right there in the middle. So I'm going to be using B. B is the more commonly used wiring scheme. There's nothing wrong with A or B, at least in my mind, but I just do B. And what matters is that if you do B on your jacks, is that when you do your patch panel also needs to be done in B style, so it matches. Okay, so what I'm doing right now is I'm taking the wires and I'm spreading them out into the little grooves with the colors that correspond to the colors on the side of the jack. So I'm taking the orange pair here and I'm putting the white orange in the front and the dark orange, or the solid orange in the back. It corresponds to the pattern right there for B. And then once I get that all done, I'm going to just double check it one more time, because an ounce of prevention is certainly worth a pound of cure, because by the time you get this thing all put back together and then you go to test it, it doesn't work. It's certainly worth having spent just an extra couple seconds to review your work. So what I do is I look and I say, okay, I got white, orange, orange, I got white, blue, blue, white, brown, brown, white, green, and green. And once I've decided that that checks out okay, I take my punch down tool right here with my 110 punch down block and terminate the jack. Now when you do this, when you do it against the wall, it will scar the wall. So what I try to do is do it down near the outlet surface itself, because once I put the plate on, it'll cover up anything that it might have scarred by me doing this. As you do this, if you're doing it right, what should happen is the sharp end of the tool should be perforating or even breaking off the wire right there. Now, you know, I just threw the excess wires into the wall, and somebody called me out on that the other day when I was making a video of a similar topic. And somebody said, well, why'd you throw them in there? Why don't you just go throw them in a trash can? Listen, for any of you trolls out there thinking about making comments about that, if you did this stuff day in and day out like I do, you would get tired of making trips to the trash can. Okay? Throw in a few pieces of excess wire inside the drywall. Isn't going to hurt anything. Okay, now I also take this particular jack, not all jacks, but this jack comes with a little piece of zip tie or a wire tie that you can wrap around the very base, which kind of helps reinforce the wire jacket right there. And if you do this, ideally the wire jacket should mate right up against the bottom of the jack, whereas you shouldn't have a lot of exposed wire hanging out of the back of the jack. This one also comes with caps. Most do come with caps, some don't, but most come with caps that you put on after you're done. Also what I'll do is I wrote the number on the cable when I was pulling these earlier, is I'll take the number and I'll write it on the side of the jack just to help reinforce with a visual that that's my number. Okay, then I'll also be using a label maker to put I'll be using a label maker to put a 3 across the top, a D3 across the top here. So I'm going to snap that into the back of the plate. Okay, and I'm going to terminate the white one now, and then when I'm all done, that'll go in here too. I'll put the labels on and put that into the wall. Okay. Alright, so now we've reached a point where I put all the outlets on all over the office, and now it's time to terminate the patch panel. So remember, this is my cabinet where all the wires come to. Alright, and here's all my data cables. And what I did when I was installing them is I wrote, whoops, almost dropped something there. When I was installing the cables, I wrote the numbers on the end with the marker pen. So what I'm going to do is, just like those jacks I showed you that I was terminating, well, the patch panel is just kind of like a more aggregated version of the jacks. So here I've got 24 Cat 5 8P8C connectors. So on the back, I've got 24 corresponding places to punch down the cables. And they're numbered, 1, 2, 3, 4, etc. So what I'm going to do is take my cables in the number that they're ordered and match them up with the numbers here and punch them all down. And then I'll have a complete network pathway between the numbers here on the front and the jacks out there with the corresponding numbers. So let's get that done. I'll show you what that looks like. terminating the patch panel is really no different than terminating the individual jacks, except now all the places for the punch downs are all just very tightly integrated together. As you can see, there's the same pattern there. The top one is 568A, the bottom one is 568B. So see how it's got like a white blue, and then solid blue, white orange, solid orange, etc. And this is under the B section. So that's what I did. I've got white blue and blue, white orange and orange, white green and green, white brown and brown. And so there's a couple of different ways you can do this. Some people prefer to lay out all their stuff first and then do the terminations. I kind of like to go one or two at a time, so I'll spread one out like that in kind of that Y shape, you know, where the orange and the green are shorter and the blue and the browns have to stretch a little more to reach the outsides. And then I'll go ahead and terminate those, and then I'll go on and do number 2, and then 3, and then 4, and 5, and 6, etc., and so on. So this is nice to do when you're doing a brand new installation, because you can actually take the patch panel and lay it down on something flat like this and terminate the wires. Unfortunately, when you're adding a wire to a system that's already been installed, you kind of have to, you know, reach up inside the cabinet and terminate the wire on the back of the patch panel while it's already mounted. So I'm going to get that done and show you what that looks like when I'm all done. Okay, now the patch panel has got all the 8 wires terminated on it, and this one comes with these little caps that you can put on the back. They kind of help, I guess, you know, block off air and maybe, you know, help reinforce the connection. I personally am not a big fan of those because I believe that if you do your wire management right and you've done your terminations right, there's no reason why those wires should pop back out of there. They'll come out of there if your wires are not managed correctly and there's too much tension on them, pulling them out of the sockets. But anyway, so if yours comes with the caps, then go ahead and put the caps on. It doesn't hurt anything. Like I said, I'm not a big fan of the caps. Anyway, so now that my terminations are done, what will happen next is I'm going to have to re-manage my wire back into the cabinet. So basically taking this slack and just kind of dressing it in there along the walls. And then ultimately, my panel is going to get mounted up in there, and then I can start doing testing on my outlets and my patch panel. Okay, I'll show you that in a little bit. Alright, so the patch panel is done and mounted. And you'll notice that there's this maze of the wire running around and down and up and across. That's actually for a reason, and I may have gone just a little crazy with that, but that's known as a service loop, and it's there for a couple of reasons. One is if for some reason something happens to the cable near the patch panel, it gives you the reserve amount of slack to be able to pull some more slack and re-terminate the cable. In other words, cut off the end and re-terminate it. The second thing it does is it gives you the flexibility to move the patch panel. So say the network configuration changed one day and we need to move things around, we could move this panel down to here. Or if they decided to put in like a floor mounted network rack, say over here in this corner by the closet, I've got a good 6 feet of slack that I could move that patch panel without having to rerun all those cables again. And also, while we're on the topic of the network cabinet, you know, this just happens to be the one that I'm using for this doctor's office. You don't need to go get one of these big network cabinets. You can simply get a patch panel and they make like these little 1U or 2U hinged brackets that you just mount on the wall. So all you would really need, for instance, is like this little white board. You could just get a little white board like that, mount it horizontally instead of vertically, and then you could put the little hinged bracket on there with a patch panel. Okay, those are very inexpensive. The hinged brackets I think are about 20 bucks. You could get an inexpensive patch panel off of Amazon or a Monoprice for probably about the same, about $20. Okay, now I'm going to begin the testing. Okay, so now I'm down to testing. So I've got 2 different ways I can test. This thing you're looking at right here is called a certifier. It's an expensive piece of equipment that's designed to stress the wire and test it for its maximum capacity to certify that it's either Cat 5 or Cat 5e or Cat 6, etc. I recommend, on the other hand, that you use something simple like this. This is just a continuity tester, and it works really simply. It's got an RJ45 or an 8P8C connector on both ends, and when it's connected to 2 ends of a cable, it simply sends current down the line on each pair. Okay, so I'm going to turn it on right now. And what it does is at the far end, you should see these little lights turn green in order. If any of them are red, or if it goes out of order, or if one of the lights doesn't light up, that means there's something wrong with either the cable, but most likely what's wrong is it's something that you terminated incorrectly. So either one of the ends of the jack is either not terminated right or didn't get terminated all the way. Okay, so again, I'm recommending you just get a continuity checker. I have to use this special certifier tester because I'm doing work commercially and I have to provide results to my client. All right, so let's show you how this works. So let's take, for instance, D1. So I'll plug my little continuity tester into D1. I've got it turned on. Then I'm going to take this other little guy and go back to the patch panel and plug him into port 1. And what I should see, after I hook it up, is I should see these lights turn green. And let's see here, I'm not, which makes me wonder if I got my numbers mixed up. Yep, I got my numbers mixed up. D1 and D2 are flopped, so I just got to go back and flop those cables and make sure that they're in the right spot by the right labels. Okay? So that's what it should look like when you test a cable and it tests out okay. Okay, and that about concludes this. Thank you.
Hello guys, this is our new project. This is a company that used to have a pretty big network in here with the previous tenants and now is a much smaller one. So I'm being asked to come in here and clean up this cabling. So we'll start at least with the feed. This is their ILEC feed. This is a bonded DSL modems with a lot of pairs, and those have been running over embarrassingly through a clip hole. This is actually supposed to be where the clip holds this cabinet in place. I'm gonna have to move that. Oh, there's their PBX system right there. And so this is the cabinet that we're going to be cleaning up. So we've got a patch panel. Most likely we've got a lot of direct lines running in and just this cascade of switches to deal with. And so it's little things that'll give me clues on this stuff. So for instance, even though these rack spaces are clearly marked, which with where the spaces are, somebody mounted one kind of in between, and you'll see that the holes don't line up because of that, even though it looks like this might be completely uniform all the way through. So I know that basically whoever was working on this really wasn't familiar with rack mount equipment. So we're going to start exploring and figuring out our game plan for this today. So wish me luck, kids. Here we are shooting, or looking above the cabinet, and you can see that the cables are basically laying straight on this, in this case, pretty tore up metal. It's probably fine, but this would have been an instance where I would have preferred it to have been secured to the wall, or even this little piece of backboard just to keep it from touching the edges. Still not a big deal. The big issue now is this is my pin, so this tells me which way this cabinet is going to open. So this was my first clue to figuring that out. Okay, so I am pretty much done with what I would call just kind of a inspection or detective phase, discovery phase of the rack here in the network room. So I want to go over a couple things that I have found here and to kind of explain what's going on. So there is, this is the feed from the outside. This is their internet connection, and it's going to give them, I believe, 5 IP addresses. And so this red line runs down to their what's going to be their phone system, a new VoIP phone. And this black line that I've now run goes to a little Netgear switch, just a dumb switch. And what that does is it splits to 2 separate consumer grade routers. So there's one, and then below here, through this big mess, is the other. So each of these routers is grabbing its own static IP off of the feed from the internet, just pairing through that switch. I'm going to try to eliminate that device and see if I can get the provider to open up one of the other ports. I already tested them, and the 2 other available ports aren't there. The whole idea here is to eliminate single points of failure. So some of the other things I've discovered. So up here is their security camera system. So a separate technician is the one that installed this router and this upper portion. So there's a switch here, another switch, some PoE injectors. And so here's a new one for me. I haven't actually seen this before, but it started when, I think, let's see if I can find it now. Yeah, here it is. I found this cable. And so this is interesting. So hopefully it'll focus on this. There we go. So what I've got here is a cable that looks like the brown and blue pairs were cut off and done some sort of pigtail like that, and then the other two pairs, the green and orange, were passed on through to the RJ45 connector. So I was trying to figure out what in the world is this, and then I found another, and it happened when I was tracing back all of the power cables and where they went. So I found this little brick over here, and I traced the line back, and lo and behold, I found another. So what is this? And you can see the same deal. So there's two pairs in here that are passed on through. Now let's see if it'll focus on that. There we go. And runs up to this switch. And what this is a handmade MacGyver-style PoE injector. Same as what that other cable was, this guy right here. So what is normally done, like on this switch, there's a PoE injector. This is a whole rack of PoE injectors. They simply wanted to make one of these non-PoE ports have PoE on it without buying a PoE adapter. It must have been that this particular power supply the guy just happened to have around and it got it to work. So we're not touching any of this stuff. In fact, we've already been told by the security camera guy, just please leave my equipment alone. That's going to be unavoidable to some degree because I can't have this cascade of cables interfering. This all should have been run off to the side because this panel has to, open and close, and it needs to stay on the hinge side. So some of this is gonna have to be moved. But I can see, he basically ran out of ports here. In fact, even on the router, there's these two guys, because if you're not familiar with this, this is how you turn a standard Cat5e cable and port into two lines. So if you don't know, fast Ethernet, or that's a 100 megabit Ethernet connection, only needs two pairs, and it only uses two pairs. And any modern switch will sense what the speed is and work with it. So even though we've run 4 pairs in a cable, we always, let me get this cable out of the way, we always, for fast Ethernet, only need 2 pairs. This is where you'll wind up with voice over IP that actually uses one of these lines for the phones, and then the 4th pair is the power liner PoE. All of that changes with gigabit, so this is kind of old school, but this is how you squeeze a bit more ports out of a single cable run in a building, and you'll see a lot of this. So that's what this guy did. He ran out of lines here, so one of these, this is the WAN feed. This goes to this switch upstairs, or at the top of the rack, and then he ran 2 of these to some devices somewhere in the building. If you run around to the other side, he did that again here, which, it works. It's not very clean looking, but it works. Looks like he handmade jumper cables. I don't do that anymore. It's just too time consuming, and you don't really save any money when you buy short jumpers in bulk. They're pretty darn cheap. But basically this whole upper area is just for the security cameras, and it's a completely separate network, separate system from day-to-day operations. And what I'm going to do with this is I'm actually going to move the router up to this shelf. I'm going to put power up here and keep it completely separate. But look at how this rack kind of came together. I'm going to move it so I can back up. So there is a patch panel with 24 ports of which are here, and this just waterfall of jumper cables down to a 24 port switch down there. So yeah, you could do this. You put a little cable management, you run them down the sides, you run them back, and you wind up with a bunch of slack to deal with, to make it clean and everything else. And so I've got two 24-port switches here, and we're actually going to be replacing all of this with a 48-port. But you have to think about why you would do this. So there's all of this space right here, above even. Right here is where an average person would stand and do work without too much discomfort. So I understand why the security guy, the security camera guy, might have put his equipment there. That's where I'd put mine, so I don't have to bend over or sit on a chair. All of this is terrible for ergonomics. And I point this out because a lot of these guys that put these in aren't the ones that actually maintain it, who have to be here for maybe hours. I was here for 3 hours tonight just to figure all this out. Not very comfortable. So even this scenario over here, so there's a table here, and I really appreciate that. I rarely get a table and a chair. But all of this equipment overhead is behind it. So when I have to work on this, I've got to lean over the table. Not easy to do. It's a pain in the neck, actually. I would have put this table over on this side. Put it next to the rack, maybe. None of this stuff's getting used. So you have to think about this when you install equipment. And let me show you another example of this. Typical telco providers will install equipment like this, and you look at the fact that it's sideways. Why is that? And there is a reason. The reason is so that you can see the ports. You can see the LEDs, the activity lights on this. Oops, I just dropped a tool here. On this equipment, and you can access the cabling. And it's the same thing over here with this piece of equipment. So like, for instance, you could have actually mounted this up high this way where all that cabling was down, because you could stand beneath it and look. But you have to take this into consideration when you mount equipment, that someone else in the future, and it may be you, will have to maintain it and have to troubleshoot it and have to look at those activity lights. So some other things we found here. So all of these 66 blocks on the far sides and probably that one right down there, they're abandoned. So all the lines have been cut that go to them. I think this just kind of loops behind it. So I'm going to pull all these out. Some of the other things I've seen. I'm not sure about what I'm going to do about this. I'm probably going to secure it up overhead and make it so that any cables that do pass through here are secured and they pass through without touching the sides. Probably going to get rid of this mushroom spacer. It's under a lot of stress anyways. And then I'll wind up securing these to the tie wrap points. I might move these to the same opening. There's no reason for them to be on their own opening. And then I'll figure out a way to edge guard this. Not quite sure what I'm going to do. These jobs usually involve a few iterations to figure out. But the fact that I'm going to be putting in new patch panels and redoing and redressing a lot of this gives me some latitude to fix some of these other maladies that go on. Something else that clearly no one's taken into consideration is this hinge point. So you've got a lot of these droopy lines. You've got power cables. In fact, I think underneath there is an outlet strip you can't see. And I've got an outlet strip here. So what should have happened is a bit more of cable management with that. Everything should come through one hole. It should be secured and run up this way. And at least there looks like a decent amount of slack already on the patch panel, so I can probably pull it over to this table to do some work on it if I need to. But so what I'm going to do is a lot of these miscellaneous messy power cables are just kind of randomly run. I'm going to run them all to one side and down. Of course, I'm probably going to put an outlet strip right here. And of course, this is all before I'm going to wind up putting a ups in right about here at the bottom. So that'll clean up a lot of this too, but that's something else I'm going to do. I'm probably going to pull everything back out of that line and go into this one, because this hole right here has no edge guard, but this one does, and it's wider. There's no reason why this should have been used for, which couldn't have been used for everything. So I'm going to clean up a lot of this as well. So the next step in this phase is going to be, I'm going to wring out a lot of these lines from the other end, the far end, and see what comes up. So I'll use my low voltage pro for that. So I'll show you that in a little bit. and start to figure out where some of these go. And the main reason for that is, well, and not on these, this is the cameras, but the main reason down here is I've got a lot of lines that don't appear to be active, and I want to know if they are machines that are off or if they're actual ports that aren't being used. And I'll show you why I need to know that in a moment. Two different tools I'm going to use for testing and kind of mapping out the network. This is the, what is that guy? The Fluke IntelliTone Pro. And it comes with, or it usually uses both of these guys. This serves a specific purpose, and then I'm using a low voltage Pro, also a specific purpose. So with this guy, I can get some very interesting things right away. Let me see if this will show up in the light. So if I turn this to service, the very first thing I can tell is at the moment it's an open. So that basically means that out of this RJ45 female port, it does not see any type of connection, and it's going to see either it's going to see an actual voltage on the line for both lines 1 and 2, and those are the two center pairs, and then the two the pair that is, or yeah, the center pair, and then the pair that is on either side of it. And so basically, how that's going to work is an RJ45 like this, the two center pins are for a phone line are where that's used, and then the pin to either side of that center pin are the second line. So this guy right now sees there's nothing there. So what I'm going to do now is take this cable, which I've plugged into the switch over there, and try to do this one-handed and see what happens. Okay. So if I plug it in, now it sees the network, and it tells me that, symbolically it also shows activity. So if I'm not here, if I'm just somewhere in the building and I want to know what's in a port, this is very important information for me. And I can even put an RJ11 connector in here. They're physically compatible, and it'll tell me if it sees phone lines, or at least if it sees voltage on both of the pairs. So the other interesting thing about this is I can actually send tone to this line. And now a normal standard telco toner won't work on a network cable that's plugged into the network. But the IntelliTone Pro will do that. So now I've gone to tone. I'm going to turn on my toner, and it'll sync up. Now I'm physically close to it, so I'm going to walk away over here. But the blue line, it's this one right there, is the cable that's hooking to it. So just getting in the proximity, let me see if the light will show it. And as I get right up on it, it gives me that full strength. So that's a real handy tool when dealing with Ethernet and trying to figure things out. So here's another tool that I find very handy. With the IntelliTone Pro, yes, I can. This piece detaches, and I can do cable testing. Let me turn this guy on while I talk. But the most important thing, let me turn this guy off too. Most important thing, the whole reason I got this guy was for the ability to beacon, and that's this little beacon test. So I'm on the RJ45 data portion of it. It's the only one portion I actually need or use for this. But this feature is much more it's much more expensive in any other tester that I've found. And it's simple. So I'm going to plug this guy in, and this would be a scenario where, let's say I'm downstairs or I'm somewhere on the floor, and I got a cable and I don't know where it goes, and maybe I don't have this or anything, but I can't send standard tone, and I want to know where this is. I know it's on the network somewhere, but I don't know where. So I'm going to go down to my options, and I'm going to choose the beacon test, and it only uses 1, 2, 3, and 6, and hit OK. And so it tells me that the beacon feature is active. And so now what I'm just going to do is waltz over here to our switches. So you'll notice that every single switch shows, it lights up. And actually these are kind of handy. I really don't like when lines are blocked over like this. And then these are all separate from that. But it makes it handy in this particular moment when I'm trying to look for stuff. So what I'm looking for is a blinking light, but I'm looking for a slow blinking light. And I think I found it right there. There it goes again. So what is that guy? I can't even see. I'm looking through my camera. So that's 11, and I go over here to 11, and there it is. And that's definitely the cable. So if I can see the activity lights, and you know I can, and this one also, it's pretty easy to do. But this works everywhere because it's part of the standard. So like even if I go over here and look at this dumb switch, it would work in here with those activity lights. It would work down here with those activity lights. So this is a super handy tool for tracing cables that haven't been labeled, haven't been mapped or anything like that. Absolutely worth the money to get this low voltage pro. I think they're red now. I think the screens are backlit, so you don't need light in the room to use them. So super handy. Love this tool. It's saved me tons of tracing and troubleshooting. Here's a typical example of what I'm running into at this office and what I actually run into a lot. So here is somebody's workstation, and what's here is another router. And you would normally see this if it was even done correctly without using the WAN port. So by putting whatever this is probably the feed from the network room. By putting it into the 4 LAN ports, it becomes basically a switch. And actually you can configure these to just be a switch. But to do that, you need to not use the WAN port. And not everybody catches that, especially because the problem with this is typically if you haven't configured this just to be a pass-through, a switch, or I think they call it a bridge, this winds up isolating this equipment from the rest of the network. That's just the way that routers work. There's a WAN and a LAN, and they only can see each other through the router. I don't know how this is configured, but we want to eliminate it. Anyway, so the only thing here is this PC and this big printer. So I have a network drop way back there. Also have another network drop right here. So I'm going to have to figure out what's in these lines. So I'm going to wind up popping these off and see if I can find out where they go. I'm hoping that these weren't like torn out or anything like that. So we'll find out real quick here. Quick thing about these wall plates, I'm a real fan of them. I've seen them a lot. I'll probably start stocking on these soon if I find the right version. So what I like is the screw that holds it in is sitting behind this bit of clear plastic, and there's a position where you can you basically pop this off and you can put in a label, and that label's not coming off. I really like these. The one issue I have with any I've run into so far is that these are not keystone connectors. So this is not an industry standard. This is proprietary to this brand. So what it basically means is if I need to replace a connector or put in a new one or a different color or whatever, I have to go through this manufacturer. So I'm trying to find an outlet plate like this, a network drop plate, that I can do this. So it's got a good, nice place to put a label that's not going to get torn off, but uses keystone connectors. So hopefully we'll find one. But anyways, I wanted to just show this. I really like these guys. So here's what I've found out so far. So I used my IntelliTone Pro to inspect the ports on this active network drop, and I definitely found that the blue one was showing network and the yellow was basically cut dead, and I think the two above are RJ11s. So I put the beacon function on and definitely found it in the network room, but you'll see here it's marked, it says P12, and I did find that on the patch panel in port 12, so that definitely checks out, and I'm hoping the rest of them are exactly like this that are active. But here's the interesting part. So here's an actual view of, and this is probably the same way it's set up, and obviously this one doesn't have anything marked here. So most likely this one hasn't been run through. But look at what I'm finding here. So these are blue Cat5 cables. I can see that the RJ11s on the top, which you'll see are slightly smaller, only use 2 pairs, so they ran a single cable to give them 2 separate 2-line phone line jacks for this, and still have a home run. But the important thing that I'm showing you here is the clues I'm getting. So these are blue cables, and they're of a certain thickness or a certain style. So I'm going to look for these back in the network room and see what I find. So here we are, P12, as I guess I'm figuring out their scheme here. So let's look at the back. Now, here's my problem. All these cables are white. And this is one of the clues you'll use. The style of the cable tells you a lot about where they go. So this is my clue that tells me essentially something is happening in between here that is changing this. So most likely there was an existing infrastructure, and you can see there was tons of infrastructure in here before that was just cut dead. And so someone must have come back through here and cross-connected these white cables to the blue. And so here's what I'm looking here. So it goes down into the floor, and thankfully, let me move this guy over. There's some really wide holes in the ground. So I looked in here, and let's see if the camera can capture it here. If I look down in there, you should be able to see, there we are, that there is some patch panel down there. Looks like a 24-port patch panel that's basically being used, let's see if I can point it here, it's being used as a cross-connect. Yeah, so it's underneath these cables, so I'm going to have to figure out a way to find this crawl space, because it looks like it could be pretty handy. So what I'm hoping is that either these guys, this is basically being used as a cross-connect, so I have a bit more latitude. I'd like to pull it out of here if I can, but I'm going to have to see if I can gain access there to do that. Ideally, I would pull these patch panels, these cross-connect panels out, and try to bring the original cable all the way up to the top. And the main reason for this is to eliminate problems for people in the future. So down in the warehouse, I found this hatch. It was mainly from looking at where all these cables ran, and they had to come to a point like this. So there's access here, and this is most likely where they've done the patch. Now let me show you what I found up in there. Okay, so just looking in and over a little bit, I see a patch panel, but these cables don't go up. So this must be a different patch panel. But definitely here's a lot of these lines that were cut from the earlier infrastructure. So what's interesting I see here is they used the patch panel mainly to tie in these cables, and they ran regular patch cable instead of solid core cable all the way over here. And then way over there is another patch panel I'm going to show you in a minute, and that's the one that goes up. So this is just a lot of extra work. This should have been an interior line that just ran straight to a point here, or they were spliced in. It should have been spliced in. So looks like I'm going to wind up repairing some of this too. But the idea is we're going to be able to reuse some of these lines now that I know where the access is, and eliminate all those switches on the working floor. See how this looks with my light in it. Okay. Well, after a bit of acrobatics and yoga to get across there, I managed to get kind of fully inside here, and you can tell it's dusty. Anyways, way over there is where the other patch panel is. That's where I came through right there. So those lines run over, and this is it. This is the patch panel that we were looking at from up above. And there's the hole where we were looking through. So this, and here's some other guys that go the other way. So the vast majority of them go this way, and then we got a bunch that go this way. So they used patch cable, long patch cables for the front, and then solid cabling on the back. Damn infuriating is what this is. This should have been done with one-to-one splices. This did not save this guy any time at all. This was a lot of extra work having to punch these all down in two separate locations, way over there, when this should have been one continuous run. And if you're already here, why not do all of them? There's the rest of the lines. They're right there. This would have taken no longer, or very little much longer time. And here's some more splices here. I really pity whoever comes behind this. I'm going to do my best to prevent any problems with this stuff. But what this does give me the opportunity is now I've pretty much solved the mystery of this location. So now I know that this is where the lines run. I know where all of them go. So now I can actually look at those extra patch panel or network drops that were coming up as an open and run them up. So I'll send tone. I'll find where the end is, so either over there or over on that side, and I'll be able to connect them all into the same switch. And that way we'll eliminate all those extra switches and routers that are downstairs. So yeah, this is what you get when you try to save money, and it doesn't save you money. So here's an example of, and I've actually talked about this before, I've done this slightly differently, but this is completely adequate. This would have been a simple splice to do, very secure, easy to identify even where they are. You can wrap these in electrical tape if you want, but leaving them like this is perfectly fine. This is a simple and fast splice. So they're, in this case, using a jack to a connector. This would have worked. This would have worked for every line instead of this elaborate patch panel scheme. And this would have saved them a lot of time. So I'm going to probably wind up doing this on every one of these lines. Here's a little example of what we're trying to eliminate. I'm basically here in this office space, and this is down on the first floor. And look at here, I've got myself a little Belkin router. Might be just a switch, might be a wireless access point, who knows, running up to this network drop. So we know this is a live network drop, and it's being used to share a network connection. The fact is, though, just a little bit over, I've got another network drop. Got a network drop right here. That one looks like it's labeled, so it might even be usable. And a network drop right here. So in reality, all of these essentially network splitters are unnecessary and add further complication to a network that's about to be taken over for management. So we're going to be eliminating all of this additional complication. So here we are. I'm pretty much down to the last few steps I'm going to do on this first night here. So it's after 10 o'clock, and I've been instructed that everybody's going to leave, or at least if everybody's here, they're not going to need any internet connection. So now I can start kind of unhooking things with reckless abandon. And actually, before I did that, I wanted to show you here, I took out all of these abandoned 66 blocks, and that really cleans things up. Got rid of all the extra screws that were left in here. And I wanted to point something out too. So somebody mounted a backboard in here. I don't know if that was done originally or whatnot. I can see it was at least at one point painted, so that's nice. But this isn't always a blessing. And I'll show you why. So this is what looks to be a little bit larger than 1/4 inch plywood in here. Actually, it doesn't even look like plywood. It looks like a fiberboard, which is a terrible, terrible wood to have to put screws in. It's very soft, so it's easy to drive things in, but it's very soft, so it's easy to pull them out, and it's not very strong. And the other thing, let's look at these screws. So here's one of the screws I pulled out, and it's no wider than one of my fingers, but even no long, but even with that short of a length, let me see if I can show you the issue here. So it is going to hit the back of the metal case, or the metal frame of this chassis, pretty quickly. So it leaves you just a little bit of gripping power. Now on these 66 blocks, that'll work out okay, but not everybody brings really short fasteners in their toolkit. So you'll notice this guy's loose, and I know exactly why. This guy is already bottoming out against the metal frame behind here. And I found a lot of fasteners. Whoops! I found a lot of fasteners in here that were in the same boat because they were fairly long. This one kind of went all the way through. You really have to be careful with putting fasteners through these. You don't know what's behind here, so something to keep in your toolkit. I don't have it with me, but some very short but very coarse threads are ideal for this situation. And so these barely do the job. They'll do the job on holding up a 66 block where the mounting base, and you'll see that in the right here. You know, these things are really thick because it's only plastic, so it puts you pretty far away from the frame. But if, for instance, I wanted to hang a device like this guy here, you know, where my head is only going to come out just a little bit, these screws are going to be too long to do that. They won't pull it off. So make sure you carry some very short, I'm talking 1/4 inch, 1/2 inch fasteners that with some very coarse threads. They're not easy to find, but when you do buy them by the hundreds. So my last step tonight, and I'm already about halfway through, is separating the cabling, power on one side, data on the other. And I understand, you know, this is the hinge point right here, so I'm going to run my power in and sit right there, and then along here and up. So I have all of the security camera equipment off and unplugged, but I kept the individual lines plugged into their respective units, and I just kind of draped the cables over. So I've got this side, or this top half done, but you can already see it's starting to improve the cleanliness of this network. And even here, so you can see, like, this power cable comes through, it goes God knows where, and runs through all of that data cable. So I want to get all of this separated. You see how they're all intertwined. I'm going to get rid of this mess. So I might have gone a bit overboard here, but I did a bit of cable cleanup. So I dressed everything to this side. I kept a few of these bundles independent because they represent different networks until they run down here, but I zip tied everything down. Also, new power cabling. So I ran all the power cables to one side, made a stack of the bricks that I secured in with zip ties. Got a secure line over here. This is the outlet strip that just goes for the camera equipment up above. And then the power strip for everything that is their data network. So if I stand back here, I've made a few other changes. So these switches that were widely spaced down low, I've shifted up. So everything is kind of consolidated at a regular ergonomic height. And all the cables have been separated into data and power. So it makes everything nice and clean. And then on the other side, I did something similar. So by bringing the switches up higher, I'm able to dress to the side the long patch panels that are now in this. So this now gives us the ability to at least start troubleshooting easily. So I can look in here, I can make runs. I didn't leave these, or I left these loose. I didn't make them tight, so I can kind of pull cables in and out from here. But this definitely makes working on this setup much easier for the time being. So let's see, it's almost 2 in the morning, but I've got everything back up and running. And from here, we're gonna stew over this a little bit and figure out what we're gonna do about the cabling that I showed you below, where they put in patch cables or patch panels. But I'm happy with how this network looks. It is very easy to see the equipment and the layout of everything. There's not a lot of congestion, so this is a good stopping point. And from there, we're probably going to have the customer decide what they want to do, and because it's going to be a bit pricey, or at least a bit of an extra expense that they weren't anticipating. But for the time being, we've got a much cleaner and now fully understood network. One last thing I wanted to mention on this guy, now that I've got everything buttoned back up, is this vertical track that was put in. I wanted to point that out for an interesting reason. So I want to hook this guy again. So there are lines, and I found these also came from that crawl space underneath. These white lines here that run straight up through the cabinet, Some of them go this way, and those are the ones that go to the camera system. But these other ones go to all these punch-down blocks, and that was at one point, and probably is partly now, their phone system. So they, as you remember, they spliced into it with those patch panels down below. But this was really unnecessary. To have run these guys inside this cabinet like this, when there was an exterior track that would have been awesome to do this with, and would have made things much more accessible and gotten rid of a lot of clutter inside this. So I really am not happy they did this. Okay, we're back on the site, day 2, and here we've got our backup power supply. This is a 15 VA trip light. I like these guys, the nice little LCD screen there for information. So we've got the whole system now running on backup power. Ultimately, we're also going to have the CPEs over here and even the PBX system for however long it lasts. All of this equipment will run off of backup power. And at 15 VA, at least with the calculations I did, all this equipment, even over there, should be able to run continuously for about 4 hours, including 48-port PoE switch. So first step we're going to do today, I want to get these patch panels in and figure out where they're going to get located, and this will determine our jumper cable length as well, down to the 48-port switch. 2 24-port patch panels, 1 48-port switch. So we'll want that in very close proximity. I want to move the video system up high, overhead height, basically somewhere in this area, and I want to ultimately start with patch panels across the top, but I want this at basically eye level. And ergonomically speaking, and I've talked about this before, so we want the equipment that we need to work on, we need to put our hands on and deal with day to day. We want this at this level. We want it at hand level. Nothing to where we have to bend over or deal with. And we'll put the ups down there because it has to sit there because of its weight. So this is what I'm going to make room for, and we'll go from there. Our goal tonight is basically to bring up this new 48-port switch. This is a Ubiquiti PoE switch. I think this is the 500-watt unit. And our patch panels are going to go here. So what I've done, so I can back up here. What I've done is I've moved up the video surveillance network, which is independent, to about as high as I can stand. I could go higher, but I think it would become uncomfortable to service. And so I managed to find slack in all but one cable, so I'm going to check that out when I start running new cables down below this floor. But I'm considering stacking this equipment all on one side just to keep the cabling a bit neater. What we're going to do today is essentially port over everything that goes to these two switches now to this one 48-port Ubiquiti switch. And that will eliminate this hardware tonight. Should be pretty simple. So I wanted to go over also a little snag I ran into here. So here's the second patch panel. This would have gone basically just below that one. And this was the connector I was going to use. I've got hundreds of these. So this is a standard keystone connector that is female at both ends. So it would take the patch cable, go in one side, and then we would basically terminate the other end with a male RJ45. And it was an interesting thing to try, and I may still do it. But what I found, see, there's these little notches in the opening, which is not typical. This is just another standard keystone wall plate. So what happens, and even let's see, let me grab this guy. So at the bottom of this connector are two big bumps, and these would fit in here, no trouble at all. They would catch down at the bottom there and work just fine. But these pass-throughs that I got hundreds of, their stop at the bottom is much narrower. So what I found out here is that clip basically just slides right through and won't stay. So I'm not sure what I'm going to do. I might just go get a big bag of the standards for these guys, which is a narrower version of this, because this guy would not fit in here. Obviously, with all these other guys adjacent, would interfere. So they make a version of this that is just as narrow as that. So I may just get a bunch of those and keep these panels. Hopefully the narrow version of this doesn't have this same problem. I really like this design. It's one stamping of sheet metal. Looks like it was laser cut. I've got my strain reliefs back here, so I'll be able to secure the cable without ever messing with the connection at the connector. Here's a bit more of what I'm thinking of doing strategy-wise, at least at this point, to the patch panel. That's going to allow me to make sure all the cables come through this hole and not this smaller one without edge guard. Make sure I've got all the proper lengths. So this...